I want to bring to your memory some things before we actually look at that text that you have there in front of you. What is it that God has done for us? It's very similar to what John began asking this morning. In fact, I think he asked that. Did you ask that exact question? What has God done for us? Or maybe it's think about what God has done for us. But let's begin there this evening together for just a minute. And I want to amaze you, not by what I'm saying, but by what God says, at least in part, in answer to that question. What has God done for me? What has God done for you, for us? Let me just mention some of those to you real quick. He's pulled us from condemnation. God has set us free from the law of sin and death. God has done what nothing and no one else is able to do in sending His Son to fulfill a requirement that was based in law. He took us from living only a fleshly life to living according to the Spirit, an open door to a much better world than where we otherwise would exist. He's brought us peace. He's given us direction when we had none. He's given us His Spirit who dwells in you. He's brought us from death to life. He has adopted us, wherein we can call Him Father and Abba. He's given us an inheritance. We're heirs of a king, and we're fellow heirs with Christ in glory. He promises us the redemption of our bodies. He helps our weakness. He works all things together for good to those who love Him. Now, I'm supposed to have a chart there. Oh, I forgot to turn my remote on. I apologize. There we go. Now, you can see that my chart ends right there, but that's only because there wasn't enough room to keep going. So you have to just listen instead of read with the rest of this chart that I wish would have fit on this slide. He conforms us to Jesus' image. He called us. He justified us. He glorified us. He gives us all things. And last but not least on this chart, we are more than conquerors through Him who loves us. Now you might notice one thing in that column that gives the scriptural reference, and that is every single one of those things come out of Romans chapter 8. Just out of Romans chapter 8, we learn all of that in answer to the question, what has God done for me? I don't know that we should ever be guilty of asking the question, what has God done for me, if we know anything at all about the book of Romans. The book of Romans is just chock full. This is just one of the examples. It's probably the most extensive chapter on that particular, that gives a particular answer to that question. But still, you could go throughout the entire book. And every chapter, if you'll notice, every chapter in the book of Romans contains many things that God has done for us. All the way up to chapter 12. And even then, Paul is not stopping, but he shifts gears. And that's where we're at in our study tonight. He has shifted gears in chapter 12. I like the way that David summarizes this. He seems to just put this all in one nice capsule for us. When he says in chapter 40, verse 2, He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and has set my feet on a rock, making my steps secure. I love that psalm. It does encapsulate our salvation, our life in Christ. It even uses the term rock, which we know is symbolic of Jesus, the Messiah, right? The cornerstone. Well, Paul then begins to help us to understand that if we truly do appreciate what God has done for us and His complete authority and sovereignty over our life, then we will present ourselves to Him a living sacrifice, all the while allowing our minds to be renewed, verses 1 and 2 of this great chapter. And that strong relationship to Christ or to God will have an effect on our relationships to one another. For example, verses 3 through 8, you may recall, talk to us about the grace-given gifts, and that's the way they're described in this section. Not making up that title, These gifts, he says, are given to us by the grace of God, and that they are to be employed, implemented, used one toward another who are among God's family. We don't have time to deal with verses 9 through 31 tonight. We're going to simply deal with a little section of that, verses 9 through 16. Lord willing, we're going to see, though, even when we continue on past this point, that even our enemies are affected by our relationship to Christ. And he'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to that point. But for tonight, let's look there in Romans chapter 12, and let's begin reading together in verse 9 of our text together. Sure, great to have everybody here. Good to have those joining us online. It may be that somebody's joining us online tonight, brethren, that had no idea we actually come together on Sunday night, because it's the first time we get to do that in a long time. And it's a real blessing for us to do that. But if it is that you're online and you didn't realize we were meeting Sunday night, we'd sure love to have you here if you're able to be with us next Sunday evening as well, Lord willing. But let's look here at our text and read together. Begin with me there, verse 9, Romans chapter 12. Let love be genuine. Abhor what is evil, hold fast to what is good. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not be slothful in zeal. Be fervent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in tribulation. Be constant in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. We're going to pick up verse 14 in a future lesson, so jump with me to verse 15. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another, and do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. And we'll just stop right there for this evening anyway. You ever notice that all of these things, if this is not the first time you've read that, and for a good part of us, probably is not. Have you ever noticed in this text how it is that we can pass by this and miss an entire window of life that God has provided? I mean, that's what's being described here, are opportunities, right? That's really what Paul is getting at here. A person has got to take advantage of these things when the window of opportunity presents itself, because like with all windows of opportunity, they eventually will close. These windows can close as well. And when we take advantage of these things, then we'll be the kind of person who's worth remembering. These actions will be the kind of actions that are worth future generations remembering about you and me and God's people. I ask a searching question that only you can answer tonight, and that is, what are you leaving behind in your life? What is there going to be when you're gone to remember you by exactly? I know that doesn't sound like anything some people who are here that are younger among us might ever think anything about. But believe me, the older you get, the more you want to leave something worth leaving. What is it that you're going to leave? I mean, is it going to be things like, material things? Is it going to be a bank account for your children or your grandchildren? Nothing wrong with that. I'm just asking. I mean, is that when you think of your life, and when I think of my life, what is it that we are thinking we're planning to leave behind that's worth having for the next generation behind us? Is it you're going to be remembered for your portfolio? You're going to be remembered for the way you dressed? You're going to be remembered for 100 other things that you might be able to describe or think of that might come to mind that are tangible, and here's the key, worldly. Is that what life is going to be? Is that the life that's going to be left behind for your children and your grandchildren to remember you by? It probably won't be those things, will it? Even if a person plans for that to be the thing people remember them by, it's usually really not. People who dressed dapperly are just as well forgotten as that whole word is forgotten. People who leave a lot of money, as the ecclesiastic writer would say, are leaving it and have no idea how it will ever be spent and how long it will ever last for the next generation to come. They don't value it the way that you did if you earned it, right? I mean, these are things that we can sure leave. There's nothing sinful or wrong about that, and it's great when we're able to, but I'm just trying to make the point that it's going to be the intangible things, you see, that people are going to remember about you and me. It will not be the tangible things, it will be the intangible things. I think I said that backwards, so keep up. It's going to be those intangible things, isn't it? It's going to be our disposition. It's going to be our kindness that we're remembered for. It's going to be our affection toward those who have known us and loved us because of the kind of person that we were. It's going to be love. It's going to be the honor that we've shown toward other people when we leave this world. But it's probably not going to be a car. Probably not going to be a house. Probably not going to be those kinds of tangible worldly things. Here in here in verses 9 through 16, Paul is instructing us on how to build a life that's worth living and then leaving behind to someone some ideas that are actually worth remembering from our life that we've lived here for however many years we get to be here. Unsurprisingly, it's kind of neat to me that it all has to do with genuine love. I mean, I don't think of love typically as being the primary thing that people will remember a person by, but it is true. Stop for a second in your own mind and you think about people who you've known that have passed on that you've loved and who have loved you. It is love, isn't it? Ultimately, it's genuine love that people remember. And in using the word genuine here, he's making a point that this is not hypocritical love. That would be the opposite of genuine love. Hypocritical love, thinking one thing and saying another, and that's not included in what Paul is describing here. No deception, no lying. In this kind of a relationship, it's genuine. Let love be genuine, without hypocrisy. And then he says, genuine love will reject, it will abhor, it will detest evil influence. Instead, he says, hold fast to what is good in verse 9, which amounts to, well, ultimately discernment in our love, doesn't it? Some of you who are in here even this evening have been students in the marriage class that I've done for a lot of new married or maybe not yet married, maybe premarital education. You might remember, others of you might be interested to know, in Genesis chapter 2 and in verse 24, we read that a man shall leave his father and mother and shall be joined to his wife. My version says hold fast. The English Standard Version says hold fast to his wife. It's the same, well, one's a Greek word, it's the Hebrew word in Genesis, but they both mean exactly the same thing as our word glue or cement or fasten. I mean, literally, that's what the word means, that when it comes to this idea where he says, reject what is evil, but hold fast to what is good, he literally is saying, glue yourself to that which is good. Cement yourself in that, but abhor, some versions say restrain, or this idea of push away what is evil. When genuine love encounters what is evil, it rejects it. And it seeks out and it pulls to itself and it cements itself in that which is considered by God a good thing for a spiritual person. Love that doesn't do that isn't real love. It's some sort of perversion, isn't it? Now, how does that equate? Let's just use a simple example that we all might be familiar with. For example, with the riots that you've seen in the news, all of that is said to be about love for the man who was killed, murdered by that policeman, and all the rioting is in name of love for those who are depressed by the man or whatever, however you want to say it. And I'd like for you to think for just a minute. Is it out of genuine love or is it out of something else? I think the answer to that is found in whether the people professing love embrace evil or good. Now stop and think. Let's test this theory. If killing and looting and hurting people is good, then it is out of real love. That would stand to reason. If it isn't, then it's not out of real love. It's out of some perverted way of looking at love, right? I'm only making the point to you of what Paul is saying. Genuine love is going to reject what is evil, what is sinful. It's going to push that away, and instead it's going to ground itself. It's going to cement itself in what is good, righteous, and godly instead. That's true in your life and mine also. I'm just using the other as an illustration to see just because someone says something is out of love, that does not make it true. A person can think they're doing something out of love and be doing something entirely not out of love. The defining factor has to do with whether it's right or wrong, not what it's called. There are many examples like that we could use from our day. Paul says genuine love hates evil, but it's going to cling to and drive itself deep into. It's going to fasten itself into what is actually said by God to be a good thing. From here, Paul, and the reason we spend time on that is because from here, Paul puts application to our spiritual family relationships. We love each other, right? Well, let's see if we love each other, because now what Paul does is he sets a litmus test out there that says this is what that kind of love looks like, because these are good things that we should cleave to. Love one another with brotherly affection. Outdo one another with showing honor. You may be aware that the Greeks had several words for the word love. I'm not saying anything new to several of us that are here. It may feel like it's old hat, but I want you to stick with me for just a second. They did this to identify precisely what they meant. Their language was far superior to the English language, and I'm not just saying that. It really, honestly, it is, and it was. Because they could say words that meant very specific things. We use the word love, and it's a very generic term. And depending entirely upon whether or not I get the context is whether or not I understand what that word means. But that it was not true for the Greeks. They were able to say certain words that meant love in our language, but they were very, very specific. So you understood the intensity of what they were trying to get across and the very specific nature of what they were trying to get across. For example, they would not use the same word to describe their love for their family as they would their love for ice cream or something. Those two different, we say, I love ice cream, but we don't really love ice cream like we love our child or our spouse or the way you love another person. Those words were different words in the Greek. For us, they're the same. So we spend a little time breaking that down to understand exactly what Paul is getting at in this text. To me, it's very helpful. Doesn't mean you have to know Greek to get it, but it does help to understand maybe a little bit of the background. Here, Paul takes two words, as we have described there on the chart, and he mashes them together. He bumps them up against each other, and he makes one word, and they were good at doing that because their words were so specific. If you can join two words, then you got another meaning, but it was a deeper meaning. And that's true here. Paul uses friendship, the word for friendship, and the word for family, and he puts them together with each other. A person might say, well, I don't get it, so what's the big deal? The big deal is this. How many of us here have people that we're as close to, we would say, I'm as close to, you're like family to me. I love you like family. Now let me ask another question. How many of us here have family that we don't even know? I mean, they live somewhere maybe around the world or across the country or something. I mean, you might know about them on Facebook or something. You might not even know them that way. But you have no idea who they are. You might share the same bloodline, but you're not friends. You're family, but you're not friends. And then again, you can have somebody who isn't family, but they're really close to you, like you think of with family. That's the point Paul's getting at. You don't just have family, ladies and gentlemen, because of the bloodline of Jesus Christ. You got friends that are family in Jesus Christ. There's another dimension that he's adding on to this information that he's giving us about who it is we are and how this love works within a local group or a family of Christ. We prefer one another. We accept one another. We show affection to one another. We actually like and care about one another. There is no greater bloodline than the bloodline we share in Jesus Christ. But ladies and gentlemen, there's no better friends than we have in Jesus Christ either. And that's the real point that Paul is driving home for us. In fact, we go so far as to compete with each other. Did you know that? We really do. Now, this isn't like sibling rivalry competition. That oftentimes is not a good thing, right? This is still competition, though. And what is it we compete in? Paul says, love one another with brotherly affection, outdo one another in showing honor. That's a competition statement. Outdo one another in showing honor. You know what makes being part of God's family so great? It's a lot. Well, I mean, that's a pretty generic question. It is a lot. I get that. We saw a bunch of it this morning, and this lesson's pointing out even more of it this evening. But one thing that Paul mentions here within our text is honor. Now, when we think of the word honor, most of the time we think maybe in military terms, that we are a very proud Marine. Right? Not honor in that sense of oneself, honor seeking to put honor on another. I love that idea. Not taking it, but showing it. Seeking to be honored is one thing, but seeking to give honor, that's a different ballgame altogether. To honor others is to appreciate and value and respect them. It seems to recognize the full worth and the importance of another person. Brethren, that is something that we should be amply willing to express and display as often as possible. We're part of the best family in the world. I would think that finding something to honor in other parts of the family would not be that difficult, because we really are family and friends of the highest caliber. Family friendship, affection, genuine affection, and brotherly preference for one another. Honoring has to do with a willingness to let another have his or her way or preference in non-essential matters. When I say non-essential, I'm saying non-doctrinal or non-biblical matters, right? Matters of opinion and preferences and things of that nature. To allow others to differ from us and respecting their opinions, even when I may disagree with that opinion. Honor says, but my way isn't as important as your way. I saw honor tested during this COVID epidemic, time after time after time. There were some who felt very strongly or feel very strongly about one perspective, and then there's another group that feels very strongly about another perspective. But I saw true effort to honor one another in our perspectives, in our differences, and why? Is it because we're worldly and we deal with one another in worldly ways? Not at all, right? In fact, exactly the opposite, which is exactly what Paul is talking about here. Not because we're worldly, but because our brotherly love and preference for one another ruled our hearts. That's a very special thing. You know, just in passing, in my line of work, as you are familiar with, I have heard expressions of love and honor for one who has passed as I visit church members, family members who loved that person that passed away. And as I sit with them and they speak high praise and honor, which is the right thing to do, of this one who's passed on, giving thanks and gratitude for them. I've even seen notes slipped into caskets at the last minute that I assume were notes of great honor and respect and love for the one who's passed away. Wouldn't it be better, ladies and gentlemen, to express our love and honor in various ways while that one still remains on this side of eternity? Isn't that worth doing for each other, to each other, about each other? And not only that, but to heap it on as much as we possibly can. Hey, here's an idea. Let's have a competition about who it is that can honor the other person more. That's what Paul is actually literally saying. Compete with regard to honor. Honoring one another is more than just feeling something. It's not having this deep-seated understanding of how much I love you. It is me saying how much I love you and me being willing to show when opportunity presents itself how much I love you. It's about the pat on the back. It's about the smile in difficult times. It's about the hug. Somehow we must speak, write, express in some way honor. You know why? Because that's the kind of stuff we're going to leave behind. I mean, that's the stuff that's going to matter when you and I are gone. Well, quickly, as we kind of close up this evening, I want you to notice a few other things as we just quickly run through some of these things. Emphasis on edification is something that Paul mentions in this text as well. Now, he uses things like this. He uses words like this: zeal, or joy, or patience in verses 11 and 12. That comes from a tight family relationship, doesn't it? These next two verses deal with the attitude, which can only be known by those who fit the verse that we've already talked about earlier in the text. You're not going to get to this verse unless you go through the one preceding it, is what I'm trying to say. The love that we have that is on fire for one another. Look at verse 11. Do not be slothful in zeal. Have you ever seen anybody who was excitingly slothful? Who was it that was talking about oxymoron the other day, last Wednesday, I think it was? That's an oxymoron. No? A what? Oxy. Sorry. I do know my words. An oxymoron, thanks. I don't know where that came from. Anyway. Those two words don't go together. They are exact opposites, right? So when he uses this word sloth, which everybody knows, did the animal come first or did the word? I always wonder that. But anyway, sloths are so slow. Fast is the opposite. I ask you a question: which kind of person makes you want to serve God more? What kind of person are you? I mean, do you encourage others to serve God? That's where Paul's going with this. Be that person who does, is what he's getting at. The one who is unenthusiastic, or the one who's quick to show zeal, a fervent spirit and attitude in their serving the Lord in verse 11. Someone who is negative about their hope, or someone who has joy and rejoicing in hope, verse 12. How you doing? Well, I don't know. Life's hard, days are long. I don't know if I'll ever make it. Maybe that's the way you feel, and if so, we need to build each other up. I'm not saying we don't all have moments like that. I get it. What Paul's talking about here would be more of a response that God's good. I'm blessed. I have a great family. Heaven is my home. But you know what? Enough about me. What about you? How are you doing? Right? Which kind of person makes you want to serve God more? One who seeks to maintain patience and endurance in tribulation? or one who's on edge and just seems like they're going to fall to pieces as soon as the next thing happens. And it'll happen because the devil will see to that. He'll do whatever he can to break us down, won't he? Each of these things have to do with our excitement about serving God Almighty. That's a privilege that we oftentimes, if we're not careful, we simply take that for granted. Paul is heavily reminding us that we should not take that for granted. Emphasize prayer. Notice what he says in that next verse. How do we get through life with these preceding attitudes? It isn't always easy. Be consistent. I've got to be constant in prayer, or I will not be consistent. The secret to our success in this spiritual family is being consistent in prayer. It accomplishes more than we could ever imagine, doesn't it? I'm thankful for God's family's prayers. For you, for me, for others. It makes all the difference in the world. There should hardly be a prayer that is ever sent toward heaven from you and me as part of this family, this congregation, without remembering in some way our brethren in Jesus Christ. When you consider the things that you leave behind for the next generation in this church family, remember love, which has to do with devoted affection, heaping honor on others, respect, enthusiasm, passion, joy, and patience. And finally, Paul says, a show of great generosity. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Seek to show hospitality. I wanted to spend a long time on this word hospitality, and I knew we wouldn't have time to do it. But suffice it to say, and if you've looked at the word before, I'm already telling you something you know. It doesn't mean you use your house necessarily. It means you use what you have to fulfill the needs of others. We may at first think of our money when we think of the word contribute. Contribute to the needs of the saints. No doubt it would include that, but there are many other ways to contribute to the needs of the saints. Some of you know that very well. We do that with our time. We do that with a level of interest in the other person's life, attention, a word of encouragement, an honest hug, a smile of kindness. There's a lot of ways that we do that, isn't there? Genuine kindness goes a long way, doesn't it? I'm not talking about the genuine kindness of when Keith stops somebody like me or something and he gives me a ticket and I say, thanks a lot. That's not the kind of kindness I'm talking about. But when saints are in need, we should always be quick to initiate response of genuine love and care in that need. It's called hospitality. Whether in rejoicing or sorrow or harmony is meant to prevail in our generosity of love for one another. And he even mentions that here in this text, both in rejoicing and weeping. And I've seen a lot of that in this place. I continue to see much of that as well. Who among us goes without necessities? Don't you know that if there was one moment where you did not have the bread you needed to eat, this family would fulfill that problem in a heartbeat? It's because we are family of God. And our love is not just because of family, it's also because of the tight friendships that exist because of God and His family. There's nothing like harmony with God's people. Look at what he says. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be haughty, but associate with the lowly. Never be wise in your own sight. All the ground is level, ladies and gentlemen, at the foot of the cross. No one stands higher than another in Jesus Christ. He is the great equalizer in our life. Compared to God, we are all lowly. And therefore, like him, we want to associate even with the most lowly. Because there we find ourselves, ladies and gentlemen, somewhere below that. I believe David was right. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. Isn't that great? What an awesome passage to remind us of the kind of things that Paul is detailing for us here. Why do some people hold back in the love that they should show toward others? Like we looked at this evening. Maybe it's pride, too proud to reach out, or maybe too proud to descend. I don't know. Perhaps it's fear for maybe being taken advantage of. And as I was thinking about that, as I was looking at it and making application in my own life, one thought came to me, and that is, if you've never been taken advantage of, then you've never loved as described in this text, because you will be when you do. But I say to you, ladies and gentlemen, being taken advantage of doesn't even hold a candle to what we gain. Thank God for what we gain in following in his love. What do you think? Think I can improve in love? Yeah, if you're evaluating me, you know I can. What about yourself? I mean, this kind of love isn't the kind that just comes because, we just live in life, happy-go-lucky. It comes because we learn it. And I hope that we can learn it more and more as you and I get older in the faith. Maybe you have yet to respond to the call of Jesus Christ. The things we're talking about tonight only come through him. I mean, really, that's the key. You need him in order to understand what the kind of things we're talking about this evening. You don't have him, you'll never understand the kind of things we're looking at tonight together. That journey begins by realizing where you are. If you're separated from him, resolve that this evening. Fix it. Now, he's already done what you need to have done to fix it, but it requires your desire to move toward him, to cleave to him. Confess him to be the Savior. Have your sins washed away in baptism, and then you can enjoy the blessings of God, the blessings of his family. And there is no family like the family of God. If you need to respond to that call tonight, or you need to refresh yourself in response, we can help you in either way, by giving prayers, by helping you in some other way that you might need. If you'll come forward while together we stand and as we sing.